Hey, everybody, welcome to the Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's Rick here, and we have Christine Spang. Thanks for coming on the show, Christine.
Hey, Rick and Jack. It's super great to be here.
Christine Spang is the co founder and CTO of Nylas, where she leads technical support and strategy and the development and delivery of products and experiences for software developers and technical teams. Before founding Nylas, she was a principal developer at CaseSplice and Oracle, focused on back end systems. And for those that don't know, Nihilus is a communication platform as a service that empowers businesses to unlock the true power of their communications data. It really helps developers by automating manual, repetitive tasks with little to no code involved at all. And I think that second part is particularly interesting. Right now we're seeing a lot of companies really focus on how do we kind of start this no code movement. So I wanted to dig in there, like what gave you the inspiration to found or start Nihilus?
Yeah, for sure. It's been a long time at this point. It's been over 9 years since I started the company. So I feel like every time I go tell the story, it's digging deeper into the archives.
Nice.
Um, but it kind of goes back to when I was in college. So I went to MIT, studied software engineering, computer science there, and I got pretty involved with essentially like the computer club when I was there, and then I ended up joining a startup that was founded by some folks that I knew from the computer club at MIT, and that was really like my introduction to entrepreneurship. I kind of came into the startup world from tech, really, and back in those days, a decade ago, it wasn't as obvious as it is today that like a startup is a great place to go and be an engineer. I think the kind of big firms were more of the destination at that point in time. And so, I always knew that I wanted to be an engineer, but I didn't know until I sort of stumbled into it that entrepreneurship was a cool way to build things and bring them into the world. Um, so kind of got my intro through that. But in terms of just getting Nylas off the ground and starting the company, I kind of had like a bit of a whirlwind startup experience at the previous company. I was there for 3 years, and in that time, it was bootstrapped. We grew the product. The founders ended up selling it to Oracle, and I went through a whole acquisition process and integration. And so um, there was essentially like a transition point where I kind of knew that I wasn't going to stay at the acquiring company long term, and it was a good chance for me to think about what I really wanted to do next. And I essentially had a friend from MIT who had started out same year as me, had gone off into the startup world, done some things, came back. And so while I was working at CaseSplice, that previous startup, we were chatting a lot as he was kind of finishing up his degree. And um, you have to do a thesis project to actually graduate from MIT and sort of build something. And so he was trying to build essentially like a customized email experience, like a mail client that had certain features. And just catching up with him every week over yoga and tea in the morning. I got to see firsthand how difficult it was to actually build something that connects to a mailbox. Like, he was trying to kind of build this contextual metadata experience where like MIT as a student experience, like all the students there at least a decade ago did a ton of stuff over email. It's like how you talked to your professors. There's like hundreds of sort of email lists and groups for different things. And so it made sense to kind of want to build a tool to enhance that. And it was really difficult. Just sort of like the oldness of the protocols, the complexity that came from trying to connect to something that's essentially like a global distributed infrastructure. There's all these different providers, all these different edge cases that have kind of come about because there's a lot of different implementations. There's like open standards, but there's all these different major companies that have implemented those standards, and just the functionality has really been kind of adapted over time because computers have changed a lot in the 50 plus years that email's been around. So I saw that it took a lot of time to do things that seemed like they ought to be really basic. And that's really the spark of the idea that led to founding Nylas. It was like, people aren't building things that connect to all the valuable data that's in email because the barrier to entry is too high. It's just a lot of work to access even the basics of that data, just displaying a message. And that was true, a decade ago, and still true today. The challenges have evolved, but that's kind of where the company started with. And there are kind of a lot of twists and turns in how we ended up growing and building the company over time. Kind of in the early days, we actually started out, the sort of email APIs that are a core part of the product today were supposed to be a stepping stone to actually sort of building this email app. And long story short, that didn't end up working out well as a business. It was really hard to monetize, had high churn, things like that. And we ended up pivoting back to really focus on the infrastructure, which was the first thing that we had thought about and built, because we built these APIs as sort of a way to abstract away this like really complicated thing that was hard to work with, so that we could build this app that ultimately didn't end up being the right direction to build a company from.
You talk about this often with previous guests, right? In Silicon Valley, we almost have this like worship of failure, or at least, if not a worship, just in general acceptance. Would you mind walking us through that kind of first pivot point at Nihilus? How did you deal with kind of calling it a day, like recognizing that maybe failure is too strong of a word, but that moment, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I would say that we probably spent about 2.5 years actually building out that email app. Started out with the code name N1, sort of internal name that we use for the app, and we actually launched kind of the beta using that code name, and then eventually we changed the name to Nylas Mail, and it was built using the Electron framework, which was really cool back in the day, kind of a JavaScript desktop application framework. And it was really interesting in that, like, we had to build just a ton of different things in order to even launch that app, because we essentially had sort of this backend infrastructure and a team that was working on building and maintaining and scaling that, and sort of adding the connectors to the different email providers. And then like a whole other set of people that was sort of, architecting a desktop app. And so it was a really heavy lift for a company that was, like 15 or 20 people at the time. And so we kind of did this like dual prong strategy, which I think really, if I look back at it now, I would say that like it was doing too much for a company of that size. We, built the backend platform and infrastructure, and we actually started selling that platform to other developers that wanted to build things that connected to email. So there was kind of a steady stream of folks that we were getting on that, and we had a support person, all that kind of stuff. And then we also had the app team that was building that app. And essentially, like, we did launch the app and got a ton of interest in it. We had to put up a wait list because there were way too many people kind of trying to get on the system at once, and it was really exciting. I think that because it was such a fun thing to be building and so relevant to like just your day to day, it was kind of hard to get away from just the fact that it was not working as a business. So it probably took us like a quarter or two to get to the point where we really just decided that we had to pull the plug, because one, we dug into the metrics sort of behind the business, and the churn on the app was very high, for a number of different reasons. We tried doing a subscription model for that app, um, and people in the email client world, like all of the major email apps out there or email clients that most people use, are subsidized by all of the major tech providers out there. So, if you're using Gmail, like Google doesn't make money off of of people using Gmail, and they store a ton of data because of it. But they're able to, train lots of different algorithms within Google, and ultimately, it's a side business, them selling ads. So same with Microsoft, different story, but Outlook in itself, like as a single piece of software, is not sold individually. So everybody out there who's trying to make money off an email app is kind of up against this bar for free, which is really high bar for kind of the base level of feature set, stability and reliability, and then even price. So just a lot of headwinds to work against, and difficult to grow and scale. And so we basically, it was just like costing us more in infrastructure to serve this than was really a healthy place for the business. So that's why we had to make a hard call. And ultimately what we ended up doing was shutting down our internal development. We spun off the app as like a fully open source project. The main architect of the app ended up leaving the company and taking over the sort of maintenance and development of it with his consulting shop. And all of this happened sort of in tandem with a big leadership change at Nylas. So the person I originally started the company with, the email app was sort of, his baby and, his passion. And so as a part of this, we also ended up going through a leadership transition where he stepped away from the company, and the person who we had first hired to sort of build the business side of the company did all of our first sales, closed our first $1 million in ARR on his own, figured out how to sell and market to developers, all that kind of 0 to 1 stuff on the business. He ended up stepping into the CEO role, and kind of we ended up launching what I think of as Nylas V2, where we really just refocused on what was working, which was the infrastructure and the API business. The reason that we knew it was working was because we had been selling it all along. We had a bunch of cohort data that we could analyze and sort of see that the foundational metrics for building and scaling a real business were actually there, unlike with the app where they weren't. We had super low churn with the infrastructure product, less than 1% in terms of revenue or logos monthly churn, which is really, really good. So super sticky product. People essentially build apps and integrations that used the APIs and never switch off us, or unless they shut down the product or the company went out of business, which is
Great, that's perfect.
basically never. It's all inorganic churn, which is a good thing. And then we also measured the net dollar retention, or you can call it account expansion, things like that, where accounts that we would close 1 year, if you look at that account again in another year, we were seeing about 250% growth in those accounts just through sort of usage expansion. Best in class kind of metric. And so we essentially took all of those metrics and turned it into a new deck and went out and raised it a new round of funding with here's Nylas, the infrastructure company that is building APIs to connect to communications data. So bit of a winding story, but what I always come back to is that there's so many companies out there that the the really short version journey, is kind of omitting a lot of the ups and downs. And for most companies, it's not like a straight journey of up and to the right, like figured everything out. That portion of a company's history where you're just trying to find product market fit and sort of see what sticks and what people want can be a lot of varying different amounts of time. So I really look at kind of the first stage of the company where it was essentially like 2013 to 2017 is like, we were trying to figure out what was the product that we could scale and grow. And we had one big miss on that. And luckily we had, another thing that was working really well that, I think if we had sort of dug into it earlier, maybe we could have focused on that with a little bit less drama.
That's really great that you could do that. I think most people, they think of a Mark Zuckerberg that pretty much right out of the gate was successful. And to most people, they feel, oh, that's what happens, but they don't realize that your story, it seems, from the podcast we've done and people I write about in Forbes, similar story to yours. Start out with an idea and then you love it, but then you realize, we're not making any money. Let's figure out what we could do next. And you iterate and you try to do what's next and then keep moving till you find, hey, what does clients want? What's going to make them happy? And then you kind of go to that direction. And sometimes it takes a long time and a lot of pain, but it's, you never see that behind the scenes. You always, and this was so frustrating because like in the mass media, you only hear the success stories. Oh my gosh, they did this. Look how much money they raised, what have you. But you don't hear all the tears, all the arguing, all the fighting, all the agita that took place behind the scenes to make this happen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, things get just so super simplified and boiled down into overnight success stories that it kind of loses a lot of the grit and the grind of what it actually takes to find something that works and that people want, and kind of the iterations of even once you do have that product market fit, there's spurts of growth, and then there's plateaus and inflection points where whatever playbook you came up with that got you through the last phase doesn't quite work anymore. And you got to get creative and figure out how to get through it. And I think, that's just sort of a entrepreneurial thing that you gotta want and get used to, because it's kind of the fun part where, you don't know if something's gonna work or not. And it's your job to be the person that figures that out.
It takes a strong stomach to do that, whether it's an entrepreneur or even for people on their careers, to take those chances. Like sometimes, okay, I'm going to move from, Microsoft to Apple to Amazon. And it's scary because you're kind of moving, you don't know, you're hoping it's going to work out, and maybe it doesn't. And then for different kinds of people, some people make that move and it doesn't work and they just crestfallen and they're upset and they can't get past it and they're angry and it just, a downward cycle. Others say, all right, did it work? Okay. Let me brush myself off and I'll kind of move on and keep trying.
Right. Or even like role switches, going from, software engineering to trying out product management or solutions engineering, things like that, going to a management role. I think it's really useful to have this mindset of especially if you have sort of like a ladder-like career, can kind of almost feel like, you have to be sort of having a bigger role and accomplishing more responsibility, things like that. But, being able to have that beginner's mind of dust yourself off. If something doesn't work out, maybe you learn something, try again, or maybe that direction just wasn't for you.
I'm glad you said that, because so often, because I'm an executive recruiter and doing it for 25 years. I started out in kindergarten. I'm not that old. So what happens is that you feel old school mentality. Hey, I got to manage a person. Then I got to manage 2 people. I got to manage 10 people. That's how I'm going to be important. And that's how I'm going to do something. But a lot of times you're really good at what you do, but you're a really crappy manager because the skills that got you, let's say you're a salesperson, a marketing person, you're great at marketing, great at sales, but you're not great at managing people. And so then you rise to your level of incompetence and it's a big mess because you felt that's what I'm supposed to do. A lot of times, no, put your ego aside just so you can't tell your family and friends, oh, I managed 30 people, 50 people, big deal. But if you're not good at it and people underneath you are miserable, well, maybe go back and be, a solo contributor, but really be awesome at that and be super successful at it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been super cool to watch even some of those journeys like within Nylas. One of the coolest parts about getting to the scaling stage of a startup is that, it does open up a lot of, different career opportunities for people within the company that aren't necessarily existing when you're still figuring out the basics of what the products are going to be. I think that early stage, it's really fun because you can get a group of builders together and really focus on the building. But once you're kind of in the scale up stage, there's the organization starts to specialize a bit. And so we have folks like from engineering who've moved into solutions engineering and gone on to be super successful. And then, one of them later went back to an engineering job at another company. So, career is a jungle gym, not a ladder. We also had an engineer who was passionate about security, bootstrap our internal security team and hire a bunch of, dedicated security engineers, and then ultimately decide that he missed the building part and that, running a security team has, almost nothing, there's not a lot of hands-on work that comes with managing the security side of things. It's like especially for a growing org, you're working a lot with sales about, answering questions about security, working with enterprise clients to kind of build confidence, putting together plans for like compliance, implementing programs for security awareness. And there's just so many different parts of it that aren't really like, product engineering that wasn't necessarily obvious up front, but it's super cool that, he got to learn the leadership skills in that role. And then at the end of the day, like, we're happy to put him into a management role in engineering and go build product again.
So now, would you sometimes see the ability in people that maybe they don't realize themselves and turn to Rick and say, hey, Rick, I know you're a great, PR communications person, but I think you could be fantastic doing X, and try to motivate them. But then on the other side, somebody's in a role and you're like, this person's brilliant and amazing, but I gotta kind of say, we got to move you somewhere else. Do you have those tough conversations? So positive conversations with Rick, but maybe not so positive with others. Do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's just a part of management in general, is having the tough conversations when something isn't working out with someone for whatever reason. And like, I don't think you can consider yourself to be a good manager if you're not able to have those kinds of conversations. And it is tough, but ultimately I think that like the effectiveness of a lot of that stuff, it really comes from like building relationships and trust. Because like no one's going to listen to you if you make a suggestion of like, hey, Judy, I've really noticed that, you're super detail oriented and passionate about security. Like, we have this opportunity where, we don't have anyone who's really dedicated to this role, and we need it. Like, is that something that would be interesting to you? That kind of stuff, it doesn't really land if you don't have a good rapport with that person. So you got to start from getting to know someone on a personal level, understanding their career goals, like seeing kind of what stage they're in. Like, are they a more junior person, want to explore? Like, do they have a clear picture of where they want to be in the future? Are they a sort of natural generalist who excels at the 0 to 1 phase? We had a great kind of startup-y person who he essentially had like another company of his own before joining Nylas, and then he grew two separate functions within Nylas during his time here, where he started out as the first individual contributor on the ground for that function. First, it was essentially our like support engineering team, getting in front of customers, helping them solve their problems. Did it hands-on, then built out the whole team, and then hired in a leader to go do something else. So he eventually moved on to start our product team. And that's just super cool. That kind of skill set of just like, I may not be the right person to scale from 10 to 100, but I can do the 0 to 10 over and over again. That's a really amazing thing to find that someone is really good at, and kind of deploy them.
I mean,
Or
besides,
even kind of enable and allow that passion and connect it to the needs of the organization. I don't want to take too much credit.
no, I like what you said about allowing, because, you know, besides kind of raising your hand and volunteering for those 0 to 10 moments, as you called it, to kind of find a different discipline within engineering or within your role, are there other ways that engineers or technologists typically find kind of their specialty, right? Like, how did you become a back end engineer as opposed to, working on the front end, as in, let's say it's 2022 right now. Why aren't you doing Web3 or cryptocurrency or blockchain engineering, right?
Totally. I mean, I think what it comes down to is like, especially if you're early career, you just gotta try a lot of different things and see, both what you have an aptitude for, and also like what you find most interesting. Because I think skill really derives from like passion and interest. Like anything someone starts for their first time, they're not going to be good at it right away. And there are sort of innate talents that help people be good at things. But often like your interest is somewhat built on those innate talents. So I don't think you have to like necessarily focus on trying to figure out what you're good at. Like things that you're good at are fun, so like follow the fun. And you
I
also
like
spend more time on something if it's fun and engaging. So you can't really get away from like putting in the work and putting in the hours to get good at something. So if it's fun to build the skills, you'll build the skills.
Yeah, I think that's great career advice, whether it's in business or just navigating a career, because so many people I see, they'll maybe become an accountant or a lawyer or doctor or whatever, because you get social status, it makes your parents happy, you impress your family, they could brag about you, but you hate it. And then if you hate it, it's really hard to succeed and do well if you just dread it and you just did it because it pays well and you get some bragging rights and social clout. But the people who like love what they do, then it's like they're unstoppable, because to them, yeah, you're not going to love it every single day, everything you do, but more, maybe 60% of the time, 70% of the time you like it. So then you don't mind working. And you see that in every kind of company. You see the people who have that, like they don't mind putting it out because they enjoy it. It's a game, it's fun. I think of people like Warren Buffett, who's like what, 120 years old, and he's still going because he loves the action, he loves the game, he loves doing it. And I think that's so important. Like, I don't know, Rick, if people talk about that on Blind enough, where it's sometimes they seem it's all about the total compensation and not really say, wait, do I really like what I'm doing? And maybe if I loved what I'm doing, I could actually earn way, way more down the road, because I'm going to be that person everyone wants to turn to and get on their team because they're just so jazzed about it. They bring in a great personality. They bring in the enthusiasm, they bring in the drive. And then who doesn't want to be surrounded by somebody like that? Because then you get energized and you want to do a better job. Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah, for sure. It makes me think of we have an engineer on our team who started in engineering and ended up moving into the sales org when we were just kind of getting our solutions engineering function off the ground. And his motivation for that was really related to, he wanted like a more social environment. He's kind of one of the rare breed of extroverted engineers. And he's a great engineer who really excelled at prototyping, and also really wanted to be customer facing, and to get the face time with people who are actually trying to build things with the product. And so I see just like a huge amount of opportunity for like a lot of these sort of, not pure software engineering roles, but like take that tech background and use it to build, other things that are related, that make use of that skill. This person also sort of long-term oriented, was thinking about starting his own company, and he's like, well, if I start my own company, I gotta do sales. So this is a great way to learn how sales is done and pick up that skill. So just another example of kind of navigating the jungle gym and trying out new things and seeing what happens.
Do you think that it's easier to work at an engineering culture or a company culture that's a jungle gym at a startup or a smaller company? Or can you, in your experience, find those opportunities at kind of these more established or larger companies?
That's a great question. I've only worked for one larger company, so I'm a little bit depending on sort of what I've heard from other folks in the
Right.
industry. I think that like if you're super sort of self-motivated, like a startup, especially, I mean, the startup has to be growing for this to work, really, because growth creates new opportunities. And uh, like I would say that there's less friction to starting a different kind of role at a startup, because there's usually less process around making the change, and there's usually more work to go around than people,
Right.
which makes people really willing to take a bet on someone who's not necessarily done it before, especially if there's a relationship there and sort of a history of getting things done. And the way I look at it, like if someone's a high performer in one role and really kind of shows impact to the organization, and they say that they're interested in this other thing and think they can make a big impact there, like I'm already predisposed towards saying yes, because if I have that trust and sort of experience with that person already, like they already know the company, versus if you're bringing in someone from the outside, like it's actually a more risky thing, especially in a small company, because there's just a lot more unknowns.
Interesting. So, I mean, I like that's good advice that you say, right? Because if someone is interviewing, these are the types of questions that they could perhaps ask to try to understand. Oh, what's the long term besides just optimizing for compensation or optimizing for a job level or
Right.
remote work or something, just a one off.
Like, for example, with security, if I decide to go out and hire someone to do security at my company, I'm going to hire someone who's done it before. But
Right.
if you haven't done it before, you need to find someone who's willing to take a bet on someone who hasn't done it before. And I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to join a startup that's growing, and be useful and prove that you get things done.
I like this thread on hiring that you mentioned. You've been a fixture in tech communities like lesbians who tech, dev color, women who code. I mean, from your vantage point there, do you believe the tech industry is making progress in hiring and welcoming more females and non males to the industry?
That's a great question. Um, I think by the numbers, if you look over the past 2 decades, we've sort of gone back and forth a little bit. Um, I think we've made progress in a few ways. One is that, like, I was having this conversation with an older woman from the industry, and you know, 30 years ago, like it was accepted to be sort of like overtly sexist in the workplace, and do things like just say sort of microaggression-y type things about like someone who was female being interested in engineering, or being in that kind of role, and just be like openly against it or questioning it. And I, I think we're past the point where it's like okay to do that. Like, if you join a company today, like most companies, I would say, like if they have a functioning HR department, that HR department will like take complaints of this type, seriously. And that is progress. I see the end state as being not, sort of equal numbers of, all genders or races and stuff like that within the tech industry, because there's so many factors that kind of go into that. I think really what we need to be striving for is that, if you are interested and capable of doing some sort of job, the industry itself shouldn't put up obstacles because of, who someone is, for them being successful in that role. And I think the higher you go, it's still the case that like, it's harder to succeed as a woman, for example. And, you do have to be better than the competition. I don't think that's gone away. And I think that like, we wouldn't be still hearing stories pretty much every year about, things that shouldn't be happening, whether that's harassment or, lack of compensation parity, things like that. Like there's still a way to go, but I don't think we should be too depressed about having made no progress, because I don't think that's the case. I think we have made meaningful progress. And I personally have like never, I don't want to on any sort of I personally feel like I don't have a lot of obstacles that are based off of like who I am. It's more about what I'm able to bring to the table, and kind of a meritocratic approach to getting things done. And I just want to see more of that elsewhere. I want people to have the opportunities and the support that I've had.
I like that because I think many people don't notice, but computer programming was historically a female dominated industry. Like Grace
Yep.
Hopper, a woman, invented the first computer language
Yeah.
compiler,
So
right?
like
Like,
if you just kind of look at it by the numbers throughout the
right,
years, or you might feel like we went backwards in time, but I think it's
right.
more subtle than that.
I mean, how do we go from, right, like Grace Hopper programmed the first computers, right? And this industry was so associated with females, and now it's almost the opposite, right? Where it's gone to the other side, and you just think of like tech bros, right? Or it's just so male dominated engineering teams at nearly every company. Like,
Hmm.
do you have any insights on perhaps how that shift might have happened, or is it kind of something that's going on at where people are like learning to program and code, or
Mm-hmm. I don't have all the answers to stuff like that. What I can say is that the tech industry is getting a lot bigger. So I
Mm,
think, one thing we are seeing is that there's a lot more variation from, company to company, and even I would say from like country to country. Like, for example, the US and Canada have more sort of gender parity in their sort of engineering hiring populations than a lot of sort of more global countries that you might be hiring or working with. I don't know the reason for that, but this is kind of why I go back to like there's just like so many factors of like
right.
sort of how a pool of people ends up the way it is. And we're essentially talking about like the cultures of like the entire world at the end of the day. And like I'm not an expert in that level of, you know, history, psychology, you know, whatever. But you know, you try to make a difference where you can, and so we do the best that we can, and hope we can set a good example for other people too.
Yeah, I appreciate that education for me. I mean, what are steps that you're taking at Nylas to make your organization, kind of your team, your company, um, that much a better place to work?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's like a lot of different things. I mean, it starts from just kind of the basics, like, you know, treat everyone the same, set high standards for your people, give them coaching and feedback, you know, give them opportunities to advance, give them autonomy. Like it's really important that people can sort of feel ownership over things. Like that's what makes people engaged in their work at the end of the day is, you know, having a clear set of goals, and uh, the ability and resources to work towards those goals, and achieve and do things. You know, we do things like we have like an education stipend that people can use. You can actually sort of 50-50 split it between sort of professional education and development and, you know, anything personal. For example, one of my employees is really into reptiles, and he's part of their education stipend to purchase some educational course about, I can't remember what the right word is for studying reptiles, but it probably ends in like ology or something.
Right.
So is it like hepatology or something? I might be making that word up. So things like that, plus, you know, like books or courses, online things that are related to your role. Training your internal managers. This is also one of the other things that I think is super fun about being in kind of the scaling stage of a company, where like when we were 30 people, like you didn't get any training at all when you went into management. You were literally just thrown into the fire and told like, you know, Joe and Mary report to you now, good luck. And you know, we have sort of a whole you know, people organization that, you know, every manager is able to talk to about, you know, the people stuff, which at least in engineering organizations tends to be kind of the sword that needs sharpening, like in terms of skills progression. Like, and this is the way that it should happen, honestly. Like just in terms of like human development. If, you know, you're a 21-year-old just out of school, like you should focus on getting really good at the execution of, you know, the building, or what are kind of the tasks of you know, the job that you're trying to do. Which, you know, if you're a software engineer, that's taking first, you know, well-defined and scoped tasks for development and turning them around, getting them done to spec quickly. So that's like step one. And then you kind of graduate to sort of higher levels of ambiguity and ownership and design. And then, you know, I think that like you need like a certain level of maturity as like a person and just like experience being in the world to really excel at the management side of things, because you know, you're working with other people, and, you know, essentially your job becomes making them successful. And so I think it's very reasonable that you know, people should be focusing on that first, because you're not really set up for success if you don't have that foundation of technical skills. And then also just like if you're, you know, really young and fresh out of school, you know, you might not be the right time in your life to kind of really focus on that. You know, spend a few years uh focusing on the building first.
I mean, is Nylas hiring right now? Like, what roles are you kind of building out on your team, and what should people do if they want to learn more about your company and your culture?
Yeah, for sure. We have a small set of roles that are opening right now. I think, like a lot of folks, we're taking it slow through the end of the year. There's a lot of stuff happening in the world, but I'm hiring like a technical support engineering role. I was hiring a security director, but I'm not anymore because they've started, and that's
Nice.
great. Um, and freed up, someone to go build and be a engineering manager again. And basically, I would say check our website. It's nylas.com/company/jobs. I think I always try to go to nylas.com/jobs, and it's not the right URL. So I hope it's /company/jobs, but it's either in the header or the footer to find the right link.
Fantastic.
It's easy to find. I was looking because I was curious too to see what jobs are
Okay.
open. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's easy to find. Yes.
Uh-oh, Jack's thinking about leaving.
I'm not a software engineer. But I'm just always curious to see, what's out there, especially, what's going on as you alluded to, like, how do you feel things are playing out? We've seen so many layoffs in tech, you have high interest rates, high inflation. Are you impacted by it, or are you worried about that? How's that going?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think if you're not sort of looking
Yeah.
around and, you know, looking at what's happening in the world when you're running a company, like, that's part of your job, right? So, we've been, making sure that we're kind of managing to a runway. We've really pulled back on our hiring plans. And I don't know what's going to happen. Honestly, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. So you kind of got to plan for the worst, hope for the best, have a few scenarios, and keep checking in with the state of the world, and make sure that your internal plans are aligning to whatever's happening. But I always like to say that nobody has a crystal ball. Like, you read stuff on the news all the time. Like, there's signal to pull out of there, but there's also just like a ton of speculation and people kind of projecting their own emotional state onto, like, whatever they think is going to happen. Like, if you're happen to be like a really pessimistic person, maybe you feel like it's going to be really bad. If you're really optimistic, like, there's all sorts of reasons, like people's own experience, background, whatever, that people can make some predictions. So I try to take all predictions about exactly what will happen about the future with a grain of salt, and distill down to what are the trends and data and things that are actually happening that are kind of driving these predictions, because that's the actual information that you need to make the best decisions you can about running business.
Yeah, I like that foundational first approach that you have there. I think it's a good reminder, especially when I think folks they turn on the news, right? And you mentioned this in the beginning of the pod. Um, you might look at your peers, you might like go on Hacker News, or you might look at TechCrunch, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, these startups are raising hundreds of millions of dollars, and I haven't. What am I doing? Or oh my gosh, what's going on in terms of the state of the economy? Or you might be seeing layoffs, and I think it's always a good step to take back and think, well, if it's in the news, it's by definition it's newsworthy. It's an extraordinary event, or it's there's something interesting or unique about it, right? It wouldn't be in the news otherwise. And so I think it's a good thing to do, to kind of realize, like, okay, like what is actually going on, or what are actually my core beliefs, or the foundational things that I know to be true, and kind of making your decisions from there. So
Yeah.
thank you for that reminder, Christine.
I mean, I would counter a little bit that, like, in the modern world that we're in today, not all things that are necessarily in quote unquote the news are newsworthy. Kind of depends on what the source is. Like, anybody can write on the internet now. Like, there's social media. Like, there's all sorts of memes and viral loops and stuff like that. And sometimes people actually write news stories about like some crazy thing that was on social media that's like actually just stupid or like not that interesting. Like my pet peeve around this is the like LinkedIn quiet quitting trend.
Yeah.
I just I'm like, somebody wrote a post about this. Someone thought it sounded good. It sort of got stuck in a viral loop. And then people started writing articles about like the social media articles or something. But like, there's nothing newsworthy like in there. If you like look at the data, like things aren't different now. It's not like people are less engaged at work than they were 3 years ago. Like it's just like a non-trend trend. So
You know what happens?
that
Because you jump on, because what happens is you jump on it, then you feel like you have to write about it because everyone else is writing about it. So that it becomes a thing. It's a weird, it's wild. It's crazy how these things happen.
Yeah, so I just keep in mind that memes are mind viruses and a lot can happen.
Oh my gosh. I love that. That's a good reminder to end on. Thanks so much, Christine, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
It was great. Thank you.
It was great meeting you. Thank you so much.
Oh, we are done. That's a wrap,
Yes.
guys. Are y'all?
That was great. Thank you. I gotta admit, I have written about quiet quitting though.
Me too. You're talking to like enemy number one and enemy number two.
Not only did I write about it, but just today I wrote about quiet quitting. But now there's another thing from like Reddit, but this is also going on for a while. Fat firing, where people want to make as much money. It's kind of the opposite. Want to make as much money as possible to just quit when they're like in their 30s or 40s and just peace out. And that's it, retire.
Okay.
Well, in my day, earlier in my career, it was just called phoning it in or coasting or,
Yes.
See, well, that's what I'm saying. It's not new.
No, it's always been that way. It's just somehow someone on TikTok came up with it, and everyone like, oh, it's always been like that. Where
it just sounds good because it's two Qs and like
that
exactly.
Yeah, that PR.
In fact, it's so funny. I wrote during like the really height of the pandemic. Let's say within the first few months, I wrote about because it was really interesting. I was getting all this data about what people were doing at home, and they were doing what you think. They were watching, Tiger King, they were going on dates at home when they should, were running the risk, napping, smoking pot, playing video games, and all that. And got huge amount of hits, but I got so much hate. It was basically everyone was saying, Jack, no duh. Of course that's what we're doing. Of course we're doing that. So we've always been coasting a little bit. I mean, that's just human nature.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise you just burn out, right?
Yeah.
That's not good either.
Well, as a startup founder, I will not publicly admit to being any sort of supporter of posting.
You are not anti or pro
complacency or Come on, Jack. Come on, Rick. Find something you're into and give it your all.
Yeah.
Right.
Although you always do see those people, who are the ones who are coasting. Even before you just know, like they're just putting in that
not so minimum. Quiet.
You're coming in the crack of 9:30 a.m. They're gone for an hour and a half for lunch. Right? It's so obvious.
Oh,
because then I have to admit too that I wrote about quiet firing because then the bosses kind of know that you're doing that kind of stuff. So they're watching out, and then when they're layoffs, you'll be the first one. So yeah, I'm guilty, Christine, of perpetuating these trends.
Yeah, well,
I admit it. I'm not going to pretend. Because sometimes when you write about things, it's fun.
Yeah, no.
It is. You got to make yourself, like sometimes, Rick, I don't know if you do this. Sometimes you're writing about it. You just want to entertain yourself too while you're doing it. And
Well, I mean,
hopefully
like,
entertain the audience as well, as long, in addition to giving them some like intel and some
It
knowledge
sounds
and
like it's
insights.
a perfectly good counterpoint to news is
Yeah.
newsworthy. Like
Yeah.
when Jack is writing the news, it's just for entertainment. So
Well,
maybe take it with a
sometimes,
grain of salt.
well, but let's be honest, with a lot of the news, I would say I'm so, maybe I'm so cynical, maybe I'm too much of a jaded New Yorker, but I don't believe any of the news anymore for the most part. Like anything I read, I like, is this true? I don't know. Is part of it true? I don't know.
I mean, I think that's very reasonable take to
Yeah,
have.
yeah,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, even respectable quote unquote publications
yeah,
these days they have an agenda, so like
yeah. It's a business too, because like think about it. It used to be back in the day, right? When I was a kid, read the New York Times. In New York, you have to read the New York Times. Even in school, like,
mhm.
they made like first grade, second. I don't know when it started, but there really wasn't that much competition. You had no internet, you didn't have, blogs, you didn't have anything. So they owned it. But now when you have like, gosh, how many blogs, newsletters, different news sites. So now it's like you got to go to like you go all the way down because you got to fight to get people to come and visit your site. So you got to go compete to say who could say the craziest thing, who could say the wildest thing, who could kind of get the most clickbaitiest title. And it's really changed. It's wild.
Yeah, the attention economy, right? Super. Thanks so much, y'all. Bye.
All
Thanks.
right,
Take care,
bye.
guys.